All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being punctual, first of all. We're going to give folks a couple minutes here, just a minute to trickle in. So just get comfortable, maybe get your water, get your coffee, and we'll get started in just a minute. So we've got a good amount of the group. I think we can go ahead and go here.
Let's do it.
Yeah. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for taking the time with us today. We're really excited to have you here. We've got a value-packed session today. Two wonderful speakers with us. So welcome to Responder Wellness equals Operational Readiness, Lessons from the Agencies Raising the Standard. I'm Will, I'm with Product Marketing here at Power DMS, and I'm just gonna walk us through a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. So in the GoToWebinar panel, you'll see a place for questions. So if questions pop up during the webinar, please pop them in there. We'll try to get to as many as we can at the end. It's time dependent. If we don't get to yours, we'll just reach out to us and we'll be happy to answer them at a later date. Just a reminder that a link to the presentation recording and the slides will be emailed to you as well, in addition to the Wellness and Early Intervention Readiness Checklist, one-pager as well. So expect that after the webinar in your inboxes. And we can go to the next slide. Perfect. All right. So just a brief overview of what we're going to cover today. Why proactive wellness drives operational readiness, how agencies are raising the standard by connecting the two, and how you can turn insight from your responders into action that makes your agency more operationally ready. To guide us through that today, I'm very proud to present our two speakers, grateful to have them in the house today. And we're going to turn it over to them so they can share a little bit about themselves and get us started. Take it away, y'all.
Yeah, thank you so much, Will. And again, we're so excited to have you all here today. We know this is a really important topic for agencies across the United States, and so really proud to be here with you today. My name's Jessica. I currently serve as our General Manager of Professional Standards here at Power DMS. I'm a retired Deputy Chief out of New Mexico, spent 20 years in law enforcement, a lot of that time working over professional standards functions, also working on things like DOJ reforms, use of force oversight, internal affairs, hiring and recruiting. And we know that wellness really touches all aspects of everything that we do in the law enforcement profession and public safety in general. And it's really exciting to be able to be here today with Sergeant Williams from Albany Police Department from Georgia. And so Sarge, take a couple minutes to introduce yourself, and thank you so much for being here.
Hi everyone, my name is Sergeant Marita Williams. I'm with the Albany Police Department in Albany, Georgia. I'm currently now in Office of Professional Standards, and also I do the CALIA and state accreditation. I've been in law enforcement for 19 years now. Been in professional standards going on 3 years and accreditation for 2. Wellness is a very vital part for our agency, especially for our officers, making sure their well-being is taken care of. And I'm excited to be here and, get into some good tips to share with y'all.
Thank you so much, Sarge. So we want to start off with just really, why does this conversation about wellness really matter? And we know that 80% of agencies are still facing staffing shortages, and we know that burnout is one of the leading causes to people turning over, and wellness has a big part of that burnout. We also know that wellness has been top of mind for our public safety agencies, as that was one of the things that was marked as our top 5 trends to watch in public safety when Power DMS and NeoGov did their trends report last year. So we know that this conversation is really important for agencies, and like I said, is really top of mind as an area that they're wanting to do more to support wellness within their organizations. And so we already are aware of these challenges, But now we are getting better at being able to actually have mechanisms that help us have greater visibility into those challenges, mechanisms to be able to track those challenges, and then ultimately act on those challenges so that we can be more supportive for our employees and reduce that burnout, increase overall wellness. And then obviously, I think that that leads to the ability to retain our employees, which is what we want, is to be able to have all of our employees have long, successful careers. So with that, we're really changing from a place, and I think, Sarge, you and I can both think back to the times when we started our careers, and I don't want to date myself so much, but we didn't even have pieces of technology, and it really was a challenge and even taboo at the time to kind of talk about wellness. And we've made great strides forward in moving the pendulum to making wellness more front and center. And so I think that philosophy about it, our willingness to address wellness, we're in a much better place, but I feel like we can still make great strides in making it even more front and center. And so even as recently as like 5 years ago, we had more of our wellness conversations just really living in those hallway conversations or water cooler conversations, or maybe not even confident enough to have those conversations. I think sometimes, and I think that we still see that, sometimes people might have a gut instinct about somebody struggling, and then they're afraid to act on that. And so today, we live in a world where we can have connected systems and make that support more measurable as well as actionable. So really moving from this, left to right items that we have listed here, from being that reactive, and maybe we were confident enough to have a conversation and have that talk, but it was really more managed through informal conversations, or maybe even, like I said, even still afraid to have those conversations. And now we're moving to be able to be more proactive and actually start to document these things and capture. We have the tools to capture some of the incidents or things that we know are going on in our employees' lives. We have the mechanisms to capture that and document that so that we actually have more tangible evidence to help us guide those conversations and have confidence in having them. And then actually connecting those to being able to take action within our organizations. And so when we have that data that's connected, it really, I think, empowers our supervisors within our agencies to feel more confident about having those conversations with our people, acting in a timely way, and then actually being able to measure those results and do things like reduce burnout, create longevity and retention within our organizations. So Sarge, I think that your agency is a great example of kind of moving through this progression, and don't know if you want to share right now kind of some of the things that you guys have done there within Albany of starting to be more proactive and documenting things when it comes to wellness within your department.
Yeah, exactly. So when we were introduced to the program through Power DMS, one of the main things that our chief asked was, did Power DMS have anything pertaining to wellness? Because he really wanted to start with the wellness for the officers, giving those supervisors the tools to recognize like things that their officers were going to, what they were responding to. And when Power DMS told us about vitals and how we could set post scores to different things that we respond to, like me being Officer Williams responding to a child death, what would that post score be set to be able to do daily check-ins or weekly check-ins, however you want to set that up to, where I'm busy being monitored to make sure that it's no trauma going on, or do I need a break, or just to be able to talk about it, be like, hey, that call was hard. Like, how do you deal with that? And that's where the conversation piece come in, where we're kind of like, helping each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so I think about that in the context of, we really did create some of these products to help us be more operationally ready, and having that wellness focused early warning or ability to actually have some intervention or support and make that more meaningful for our agencies. And it really is about being operationally ready. And so what does that really mean? And so we're talking about things, everything from our performance from day to day, having reliability in our data, again, having that confidence instead of expecting people to act off of just that gut feeling. And then obviously, like I said, we want those to drive retention. And so we know that we ask a lot of our law enforcement community, and as well as our E911, dispatchers. We're asking them to perform almost to perfection every day under a ton of pressure, and to make decisions, within milliseconds sometimes, that can be life and death situations. And so when we take that into context and actually look at the whole employee and wanting to support them from that performance, we really want to make sure that we are able to do things like decrease the number of, uses of force within an agency that might be out of policy. We want to make sure that we have our teams are operational, and that we have fewer disruptions with things like staffing shortages because of people needing to be out. We know that we have people that end up having to go on light duty or take unscheduled leave when they're really stressed out. And so if we can be more mindful of supporting them at the front end, we can really reduce that and increase our operational readiness. And again, like I said, ultimately, we want to be able to retain our experienced officers, have that good morale, and really be able to support our employees. And so readiness really is that wellness, that visibility, and the follow through. And I think when we equip our agencies and our supervisors the ability to do that, everybody wins. Are we still going to have people that struggle? Absolutely, because the job we do is hard. We see things that humans shouldn't have to see. But if we can give them the support and actually acknowledge that, yes, those things are difficult, and we have a way to track them and be able to support our employees, I think that we are making our profession a lot better as a whole, and really, like I said, ultimately increasing that readiness, but also increasing retention and just employee morale. So with that, how can agencies strengthen that readiness? And again, we start from that early detection, having mechanisms to be able to, like you're saying, Sarge, capture those difficult calls that our employees are going on, have a way to actually document that, and then also being able to demonstrate to leadership how things are improving, and not just to leadership, but also to the employees. I think when our employees see like, oh, wow, like my sergeant checked in on me, they care. It makes such a big difference, right, Sarge? And so I think you had a great, example here, but we're talking about, being able to detect those potential issues or risks that we have within our agency, whether it's an employee who's been on a difficult call, or maybe they had an incident where there was an out of policy use of force. How we're able to then document that and then move forward is really important. And I think you have a great story to share on this that you guys recently dealt with.
So just recently, we had an officer that was facing disciplinary for use of force. And when the appeal process went through, and just listening to the officer of what he was saying that he just left a call where it was a major shooting going on. And then right after that call, he responded to another call right after that, where he didn't have time to like decompress, and adrenaline is still running, and he ended up in a use of force where de-escalation could have been introduced, but he was just still hyped up off of the call prior that he didn't have any time to decompress. So while explaining that, and our chief realizing like, okay, he's even more happy for this new tool that we have that will be able to track, where supervisors could see, hey, he just left off a high call, like a shooting. Let me intervene where I can send another officer so he can kind of get back, get his stuff together and get back in the game. Or maybe the supervisor could respond in replace of him, just to give him that break to get it all together.
Yeah, and I love that. And I think it really shows, and one of the things that's of course hard to change within an organization is culture. But I love that story because I think it really demonstrates the fact that the employee in that conversation with your chief was willing to share that he was still amped up, that other call had affected his ability to respond to the next call. And I think that takes so much courage. And so I really applaud your agency for creating an environment where the employee was able to share that, because if we don't have those conversations, right, as an organization, we can't make the decisions or the changes to be able to help that employee. And so I applaud you guys for having that, and also for then being able to say like, okay, maybe we need to change things, or now we know that maybe this employee needs to be reminded that they need time to decompress after a really difficult call. And again, I think so often in law enforcement, we're quick to expect people to just, put it in a box and go to the next call. And, while that works, sometimes it's not really feasible or realistic. And so being able to have mechanisms to then document that, I think is so powerful for an agency. And hopefully this will help that employee as well as your whole agency reduce that risk overall. And I think that that is such a huge win. And really that's why we have processes like use of force reviews, early warning, being able to track these indicators, et cetera, so that we really can have exactly what this slide says, that awareness to accountability. And so I think that that's such a great story, because it really shows how even when we have something that maybe goes wrong a little bit, it's not the end of somebody's career, it's not the end of the world, but it's about taking accountability for that and changing the way we maybe do things moving forward to support that employee.
Absolutely. And what you said about accountability, it didn't take away from what happened, but the chief was open to listen to, his point of view of how he responded. He did get the punishment, but it wasn't the punishment that he expected, but he also took accountability, seeing it from the other side as well. So now, not only did we gain something, he gained something too, and we all learned from the situation.
Yeah, and I'm sure that was a much better outcome for the employee, right? And especially like when it comes to morale within your agency, that spreads very quickly, I feel like, right? Because that officer is going to go out and share kind of what happened with at least a few people. And so for them to know that, yes, we are going to be held accountable, but we're also learning from it. We're going to, when we're truthful and we are vulnerable, then we can actually make changes to make things better for everybody involved. And so again, talking a little bit more about kind of lessons from your agency, Sergeant, you guys have really been very proactive in making wellness a part of your daily operations, whether it is, exercise, nutrition, other, all of those things that sometimes we take for granted or think like we don't have time to do as an agency, or we're not going to prioritize it. Again, I know the pendulum swing and we're getting better and better at this, but being able to, again, have that visibility, again, not always changing the outcomes, but it does change our ability to have good accountability when we're able to detect, document, and demonstrate. And I think, when we are able to when we're able to do these things more efficient, it's more meaningful. If we're able to catch these things and have those conversations with our employees in a timely fashion, if it's within hours, days, a week of the incident versus 3 months, 6 months, a year, so much more effective. And so talk a little bit about how you guys have kind of worked to streamline some of your wellness components and how that's worked for you guys.
So we're off our paper. We're, well, not 100%, but we're trying to get there to completely off of paper, where we're offering different tools for the supervisors where they can visually see it. So when you visually see something, you'll be able to detect like different things that is going on with the people that you supervise. So not only with the vitals that we just implemented, we have a chaplain program as well that we have for our agency. And then it's other tools like with training, like when you get new recruits that come in, the training department, they invite everyone to come work out with the new recruits. So now you're building relationships, you're building bonds, and you're talking. That's how the conversation pieces happen. And with our chief, he's always welcome like new ideas. It's not just one thing. He's always looking for new innovative ways to help us be a better agency.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so important to have that introduced at the beginning of somebody's career, and making that part of the culture again when they're brand new hires, and showing them like, yes, wellness is going to be front and center. We're going to have these conversations. We're going to work to detect problems early. We are going to document that so that we have a way to track or record, again, being able to provide that consistent level of support as well as accountability, and then ultimately doing that in an efficient way and reducing the time that it takes for us to do that, because we know timeliness, being able to address whether it's a traumatic event or or a use of force that's out of policy, the quicker we can take action on that, the more effective the outcome is going to be.
And that's another thing, Jessica, that I like about Vitals is that they have the check-in. So if you set the threshold for whatever incident for, like, say 6 months, it gives you those alerts to continuously check in with your people, because, we're humans. Sometimes we do life be lifing, and you have to, it gives you that alert, like, hey, the time is dwindling down from those 6 months. Go ahead and check on your officers, see where they at, because it may be something additionally that they need. They may need, like, hey, I would like more training on this. I would like to know how to do this better, or I don't feel comfortable doing this. I need more help. So it starts conversation, and it do make us a little vulnerable. And as law enforcement, we don't like using that word vulnerable, because we always supposed to be strong. But how can we be strong if we are not vulnerable, if we're not talking about it? So.
Yeah, I love that you said that, and it's kind of it's not timely, but it's ironic, I guess, because that's actually one of our core values here at NeoGov, is that vulnerability is courageous. And I feel like that goes so far, and especially when you're talking about, wellness within our organizations, and especially when it comes to our employees who are having a hard time processing calls or have been under a lot of stress. It takes a lot of vulnerability, and it takes them being courageous to sometimes either come forward, or even for that supervisor to have that conversation to support their employee. And it's so important. Like, I know that these types of behaviors will save careers, save lives of our employees, which is extremely important to me. Unfortunately, when you've been in this career long enough, I think we've all unfortunately lost people to suicide, or maybe we just watched them, throw their career down the drain. I've been sharing this story a lot over the last year and a half. A year ago, January, I think it was, the agency that I spent the bulk of my career at, they had an employee get into an off-duty altercation at a convenience store. He was in his unmarked unit, ends up pulling out a gun on a family after a verbal altercation. They call 911. Deputies respond to the scene, realize it's one of their own detectives that's involved. He was highly intoxicated and in his unmarked patrol car, and they found 14 empty bottles of vodka in that car, in his truck. So we, none of us can sit here and say that there wasn't signs of alcohol abuse or him struggling at work. And so why did we not have these conversations with the employee? Why did we not have mechanisms in place to help us save him before he ended up in a situation that ultimately cost him his whole career, as well as diminished the credibility and professionalism of law enforcement altogether? And so I think that these types of tools and us changing our mindset about wellness is so important, and really will help elevate our profession, and ultimately, like I said, help us take care of our people, more than anything. So I think it's just, again, we all have kind of those stories that we can relate to. And so let's talk a little bit about, like, what are those readiness indicators that every agency should be keeping an eye on, or should have the ability to track. So everything from exposure load. What do we mean by that? So are we aware of that officer that's had a really bad string of calls, right? Like, we know that things come in waves, and sometimes it's just like bad luck. There's been a full moon, or there's been a string of crashes, and the same people have ended up dealing with some of those calls. So do we have a mechanism in place to be able to track that? And we do now with Vitals, with our CAD notes integration. And so being able to track that cumulative stress, I think it's so important, and it shouldn't be a new concept, because we know that we're exposed to things over the course of our careers that build up. And so being, again, in a situation where now we can actually track that, and have visibility into saying like, okay, there is this cumulative stress, what can I do? Or looking at things like engagement signals or lack thereof. Like, is somebody who's normally jumping calls or volunteering for extra shifts or writing a lot of tickets, has their behavior changed? Have we seen them, have we seen a lack of engagement? And so oftentimes we will see that prior to the performance dropping. And so we should have a way, again, to be able to empower our supervisors to talk to that employee, document what support they're giving them, to be able to actually support that employee and ultimately save them. And then those recovery indicators. So being able to actually, again, support them, give them maybe that tool set or the support, training class, a referral to peer support, utilization of EAP programs, all of the tools that we really have at our disposal. When can we actually, give them some time to decompress, like you were saying with Year 1 officer's story? Like, can we actually say, like, you know what? Maybe you need to have a 30-minute break after this call, or maybe you need to have a day or two off to decompress after dealing with this child death investigation. We have the ability to do those things. And sometimes I think we're so afraid to do it because we're like, oh, wait, we're acknowledging that, that it's stressful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think I want you to share your story here in a minute, Sarge, about when you lost your coworker with kind of those recovery indicators and having that time. And then just our follow through. So being able to actually, again, give those supportive actions after critical events, can we actually track that as well so that we can actually measure, is this reducing the amount of stress our employees are under, or are we seeing, less burnout? And really that accountability turns into that care and protection and support of our employees. And I know you've shared this story with me before, Sarge, but you had lost a good friend within your agency. And so talk about kind of how these, readiness indicators really resonated with what you went through at the time when your agency wasn't in a place to support people as well.
I lost a good friend in the line of duty, and just remembering the day when it happened and what happened afterwards. It wasn't, losing someone so close, someone that you work side by side to, that knowing that you're not going to see them the next day, and how everything is just right back to normal. Like, you're back on there. It wasn't really no recovery for me. I just went back to work. It wasn't really no follow through. We had like a peer support group at one time, but it fell off. And some people can't just bounce back like that. And I wish that it was tools like this in place where the threshold would have been a little longer, where periodically there are check-ins to find out like what's going on with the stress level, or why am I continuously working through this where I am not requesting a break. Did someone recognize to be say, hey, you have time to take time off. You need to take this week off to get your thoughts together and just, decompress. I mean, grief is grief, but also, just working through it and just seeing where the mindset is, because everybody is not built the same. So with this, new tool, now we can monitor what is going on, how we're responding to different calls, and how we're taking everything in from the exposure that we're experiencing. Because it doesn't only have to be, losing someone that you work close to. It could be something that you respond to that triggers something else, that reminds you of, we had an incident where we lost a young child by a drive-through shooting. And that was my investigation, and I was thinking like that could have been my nephew laying in the bed. So you take on all these things and you don't know how to release them. So with these type of tools, now we have different things that we could reach out to be able to offload on.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, so much of what you just said there, it just hits home, because I think, again, all of us in this profession, we've been in those situations, whether it's losing a coworker or, a really difficult homicide scene, or, a fatality crash investigation, things of that nature. And we are really kind of, we had been so programmed to, like you said, just get back to work. And that was actually kind of an accepted coping mechanism, that our profession is like, nope, you just get back to work, and that's part of what helps us move forward. And can that be helpful in some ways? Well, sure, right? And so again, you want to be mindful of the individual, but sometimes that supervisor or that peer stepping in and saying, no, like take some time to actually to grieve and actually process that loss, right? Because so often we don't do that. We don't allow ourselves that time in our profession. And I know I've been in situations where that happened. And so being able to, like you said, be able to track that, it empowers, I feel like, our supervisors, our agencies to really give that support and document that and be able to have just healthier employees overall. And so really, why does the documentation matter for this as well? And so I think it really does a couple things. It proves that our agencies care, as well as it can help protect our agency as well as our employees. If we have that, let's just take your example of that officer. If that wasn't documented, that the agency had reviewed that use of force, found it to be out of policy, gave him some additional training, put in mechanisms. If there's another use of force that, let's say, maybe is within policy, but has a bad outcome where maybe somebody gets injured and it goes to court, doesn't it make the agency and that employee feel so much better knowing that we have proof to show that, like, these are the things we've done. We did the training, we did the review, all of your ducks are in a row. And that also should bring peace of mind to our employees as well as our agencies to be able to show that, yes, we reviewed these things, we have a system in place. And so again, for those supervisors to be able to take action to support that employee, being able to have those check-ins and follow-ups, showing that we had resources to give them, and then being able to document that and have it be reviewable in a system, and also have that documentation available if need be later on, I think is so valuable. And I know, like, when I was a deputy chief, these are the types of things that would help me sleep better at night, knowing that I'm setting my employees as well as the agency up for success. And so I don't know, Sarge, if you want to kind of touch on how it's been for you guys to kind of transition from those paper processes, or maybe not having the mechanisms to do these documentations of these processes, to now being in a place where you're able to do this. I think it's been a great learning experience for you all, and I think you feel a lot better about where things are at.
Yes, just being able to, get the product and be able to format it for my agency. Every agency is different, but what company do you really know that provides you with a tool where you could format it to fit you? And that's what I love about Power DMS, is that I'm able to structure it to fit our agency and even add on. And also with Power DMS, they share ideas from other agencies, what other agencies are doing, and they don't gatekeep. So we get to steal their ideas too and implement it and make it work for us. So as we're building our Vitals platform, it's going to be real good, especially not only is it providing something for the supervisor to the officer, it's also giving a line where it's for the officer and the officer's family as well. So nobody is really left out. So everybody gets something. It's a win for everyone.
Yeah, I love that. And so valuable that you bring in, like, being able to support our families too, right? Like, I was just having a conversation with somebody that's getting ready to retire, and they have very small kids. And I think back, my husband was also retired law enforcement. I think back, our kids were little when he retired. And so they almost don't have a memory of him being in law enforcement. But I was still in law enforcement, throughout their childhood, and the burden that our families kind of take on with our work. And it's like, we chose this line of work, they didn't choose it. And so being able to make sure that we're caring for them as well, I think is just so important.
Yes, and just to include them, that is awesome, to include them, to see what we're going through and even how to deal with us,
Yeah.
So coming home from a stressful day, they don't know what to say. Well, guess what? Now they have the tools to know how to, reach us.
Yeah, exactly. And so the other big part of this, and I think this is one of the biggest lessons I learned, and I think as a fellow accreditation manager, Sarge too, I think this is such a big part of, what accreditation allows, what these types of tools allow, is the importance of closing the loop. And so making sure, especially when it comes to wellness and early intervention, the ability for us to actually say like, no, the check-in did happen. We captured it and we're able to show that we closed the loop with that employee. And making sure that, having those connected systems, it makes it easy for us to show and giving us the tools to close those loops. And one of the biggest things I learned when I was working on DOJ reforms with the Albuquerque Police Department, our monitoring team, they just like kind of beat this concept into us about closing the loop. And it's so, it's one of those things, again, that sometimes we take for granted, or we think like, oh no, it's done. But how are you able to show that it's done? And
Correct.
So having the mechanisms and the tools to be able to show that we're closing the loop is such a big deal in, again, reducing risk, also being able just to defend our employees when they are faced with, the inevitable lawsuits or questions into their integrity about how they're doing their job. When we have the processes in place and the mechanisms in place, again, to be able to document and show that we're closing the loop on those reviews, on doing the check-ins, being able to actually show that we, did take action and show the employee what's next, and showing the visibility again to, yes, those follow-ups were completed. Like, yes, he needed to do additional training or take, a refresher in that de-escalation training. And actually having the documentation to show that he did that, that's closing the loop, and having the ability to show that follow-up is so important. And then, really being able to measure this, because if we have the documentation, then that gives us the data, which helps give us the ability to make additional tweaks to our systems to make further improvements and be able to do things like make better, decisions in our training, our policies, how we're supporting our employees, which ultimately leads to those better readiness outcomes. And so really making sure that we have the ability to show that verified follow through and closing that loop is such a important thing for us to do in law enforcement. And I think it's something that we often still struggle with, and so especially, like, I just always think back to like accreditation, people are like, well, why do we have to actually show the completed form? It's like, well, you're showing that you're actually doing it. Yes.
Correct. And you mentioned something that also with Vitals, it has an assist plan. So with the assist plan, you could create whatever it is that that the officer needs. It's not always have to be like, it don't always have to be training. It could be coaching moments. It could be a review or something. It could be something positive to assist the officer to get them where they need to be. So that's another good thing, that you could function it to however you want to do it, but it shows the completion, the closure of this was the problem, this is how we addressed it, and this is how we completed it.
The other thing I love about that, and it's something we haven't really touched on, is, as we have employees that move around into different squads or they change a shift bid, having the ability as a new, a sergeant that's maybe I'm new to supervising this squad, for me to have that kind of historical context if needed, to be able to know, like, what have my employees been faced with? What mechanisms have we done to support them? Having that documentation really allows us to have that easier handoff when we have employees, moving around within an agency. So I think that that's great. And again, increases the visibility into what we're doing as agencies to close the loop and support our employees. And so again, we've talked about these both a little bit already, Sarge, but just to be able to talk a little bit more about, what are some of the tools that Power DMS has to enable this readiness? And of course, we have Power Vitals and Power Line, which you've referred to both already, but being able to really make those connections, provide that documentation, and really deliver the wellness portions of our resources within our organization to help drive and support operational readiness, I think is just a really great way that we're able to support agencies. And so again, Vitals being that wellness forward early intervention, being able to capture things like that cumulative stress, put actually a quantitative measure on the amount of stressful calls or the types of calls that they're going on, or what other indicators have been potentially affecting that employee over the duration of a given time. And then being able to have that follow through, again, though we know that those will ultimately have operational impacts. And then Line, which you talked a little bit about, but that first responder app, again, such a big part of that is also being able to be available to our families and have something really at their fingertips where they can, pop into the app and review some different materials that might be on there. Or again, going back to your example of the sergeant, maybe they get on after that really difficult call and just have the app walk them through like some breathing exercises. Taking those, taking that 5, 10, 15 minutes really can change how that next call goes. And so having that resource available, I think, is huge. So again, being able to deliver and support our officers and families in that anonymous way, I think that anonymity is a huge piece as well. I know we have a question in the chat that hopefully we'll have time for, about kind of supporting people in that anonymous way when they're utilizing programs like peer support, which you also touched on earlier, Sarge. And then also just being able to stay connected, reevaluate themselves with our self-assessments that we have within Powerline, and then giving the organization some insights. Even though it is anonymous, the organization can have some feedback on types, like what types of information are our employees engaging with. So we know if there had been, a really bad incident within our community, or maybe there had been a riot or the loss of an officer, things of that nature, it allows us to have visibility to say, okay, we've had an uptick in a lot of employees engaging with this type of content. Maybe we should bring in additional resources or provide additional support or training in a certain area. And so I think, again, Sarge, you've talked about both of these already, but anything else that you want to add as like what's been a positive impact on your organization?
Just switching over to the Power DMS suite, where we have multiple platforms. We have the professional standard. We have where we could document our use of force, our internal and citizen complaints. And there's just so many functions within Power DMS that we didn't know that we had all this time, that we're now taking advantage of utilizing them, and it all works together. And we're just excited about, especially building out this wellness part. It's going to be major for us.
Yeah, and I really do think that, it will contribute to increasing your operational readiness for your organization. I also love that you brought up the fact that, so many of our customers, and I was guilty of it when I was a Power DMS customer as well, like sometimes we underutilize the functionality that's there, right? So really encourage people to get into our communities, share with other customers how you're utilizing the products, and just be proactive in learning about how you can do that. So want to be cognizant of time. I know we have a couple more slides to do, but some of the results that agencies are seeing, we have that supervisor review that's happening faster. Again, that timeliness is so important. When we have less time on paperwork, we're able to focus on leadership and really taking charge and taking care of our people, which is important. Being able to have that earlier identification, showing, being able to identify those patterns. Again, we can act and address burnout, at the beginning versus once it's too late or already having adverse effects on the employee. Having that improved documentation, again, being able to close that loop, showing that we're supporting our officers, I think is really important. And then ultimately just that increased visibility across our, our teams, our squads, our units, et cetera, and having that information available when we have employees that change. And so again, when we're able to make our wellness operational within our agencies, it really does improve performance. And so also, sometimes how we talk about wellness can really matter. And again, talking about those culture changes or just like the philosophical changes that we have as we're bringing wellness, into our agencies, instead of saying things like, the mental health of our officers, sometimes that can have a negative connotation. So when you're saying things like, we want them to be prepared for readiness and resilience, sometimes that's just more palatable for our employees and even our communities, because sometimes they think mental health has a negative connotation, which is unfortunate, right? Because we do need to normalize that. But again, this is just a quick slide to demonstrate how you can talk about wellness in ways that are maybe more, again, palatable. So having that support follow through instead of that employee assistance, or having that liability reduction investment. We talk about wellness spend. And again, wellness is such a hot topic in law enforcement, but how we go about talking about it, I think, is so important. Or instead of, you know, having a wellness initiative, and sometimes I think maybe we do want to talk about it in a wellness initiative. But again, if you're struggling with changing culture within your agency, maybe you talk about it in the context of operational readiness, or, you know, an operational readiness effort. And then again, I feel like this is such cliche, right? We tell people to reach out if they need help. Well, yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, like they're not going to do that, right? So it's like, we want to make support easier to reach. So we want to be proactive about providing that support. Like we don't want them to have to ask, we actually want to offer it. And so again, how we approach it, how we talk about it, I think really matters and can really help drive that organizational cultural change when we're trying to support our employees. And so we're just about at time, but real quick, we wanted to give you guys a 30-day challenge. And so, you know, pick an indicator that you want to maybe track within your organization. So we give some examples that get here. Again, you guys will get this to you later today or tomorrow in your email, but maybe look at, can we track exposure load? Can we track engagement signals? Or can we track recovery indicators or that follow through rate of, are we actually following through and seeing if there's documentation that people completed the support that we're trying to give them. And so, you know, see what you learn when you actually are more mindful or intentional about tracking these things within your organization. And I think when agencies find that, you know, when we protect or support our people more proactively, then that's going to increase our operations. Also, it just makes for happier employees. We all know that. Yeah, and better retention, which helps all things that we're dealing with. And I believe we just had maybe one question in the chat. I know we're at time. I appreciate you guys all sticking with us. We do want to allow you guys the ability to continue the conversation. So please feel free to grab out your phones real quick. You can scan these QR codes to learn more about either of these products. For the question in the chat, if the person is still on, you know, being able to track the utilization of things like peer support while maintaining anonymity can be done. So I've seen it done a couple different ways in different organizations, from anything from, you know, the person who's providing the peer support, they maybe track just how many conversations they've had with people. And it's just a number that they can say like, yes, I you know, talked with somebody today, but there's no names involved. So you can put the onus on your peer support personnel to track how many times they're talking with people, but I'll think more about that. Definitely, I think it's a huge part of our employee wellness within our organization. So having peer support programs is great. We really appreciate, again, you all staying with us today. Sarge, thanks so much for being with me. Any parting thoughts you want to have before we send everybody on their way?
I'm ready for the 30-day challenge.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, we'll be doing some follow-up on that 30-day challenge. So again, take a look at those, see what you guys want to track. Thank you all so much for being with us today. Stay safe out there, and thanks for the work you do.